Who is the most famous person you have ever met in person? I met Stephen King. It was a book signing and I was nervous and didn't know what to say. He noticed and broke the ice by saying, "You must be my tallest fan." He leaned up against me and they took our photo. I met Fleetwood Mac a couple of years ago and although awestruck they couldn't have been nicer. Lindsay even insisted on giving me tickets to the upcoming concert I had failed to get. Met Chris Hadfield when he got back from the ISS, International Space Station. I now have his book which is signed. Edit, thanks for all the likes, smile. Bruce Campbell. He had an autograph signing for his book Make Love the Bruce Campbell Way and he sits down with each person for 1 minute. When he wrote to mold my nickname, he asked how I got it. I said, "Oh, I backyard wrestled in high school under that name and it stuck." He said, "Not bad, could be worse names to have stuck. I could be writing Dickface in this book instead." I met Tom Hanks in a fish and chip shop in Scotland. I blurted out, "I wish you were my dad." He laughed and said, "I get that a lot." Matt Damon, chill guy, gave me 5 minutes of his day during his lunch break. He was in my city doing a few scenes for a movie. He was at a diner grabbing a bite and I was sitting next to him. Never bothered him and we both ate and afterward as I was leaving I quietly told him I enjoy his work and I hope he has a good stay here. He replied back that he just got in yesterday. Back then, this was 10-ish years ago now, and that he's loving our food. Bit of casual back and forth. He then asks if I know any local food stops off the beaten path so to speak, and as it happens I love my not known to everyone food stops, so I told him my top 5 stops. Then we wished each other a good rest of our day and parted company. That was a fun 5 minutes of my life. I've also run into a few bands after a show at various local ma and pop food stops. In the summer of 1979 I was working as the receptionist for a fancy travel agency in New York that did the bookings for entities like the Metropolitan Opera and the Cleveland Symphony Orchestra. One day the phone rang. I answered it. "Mayfair Travel, how may I help you?" On the other end of the line, "This is Henry Fonda." He needed to book tickets to get to the Tony Awards. Who'd have thought he'd be making his own travel arrangements? The travel agents were falling all over themselves, they were so excited. Paul Newman. It was 30 years ago and I was working in an airport bar. He was in town for an auto race. I asked him about his race car. He told me no one ever wanted to chat about racing, only his movie stuff, and he chatted with me for about an hour as I cleaned up the bar. I've met dozens of fighters and wrestlers. I met Conor McGregor right before he blew up. He was very nice and polite. He may be less those things now though. Outside of those type of guys, I've met Chuck Zito. He was also nice, and had some serious meat hooks. He's maybe not that famous, but as a huge fan of Oz and Sons of Anarchy, it was definitely cool to meet him. Keanu Reeves. He brought a typewriter for my dad to repair back when I was in nursing school. I was at my dad's shop the day he came to pick it up. He was super friendly and said, "Oh, you're his daughter? How's nursing school going?" I was shocked. We spoke for a few minutes about that and typewriters. Wonderful human being. I met Selena Gomez when she was filming Spring Breakers. I was working at a hotel they were staying at in Clearwater, at Peteria, and they had food catering and free Red Bulls, that I later found out were for the extras. We talked for a bit, maybe 40 minutes or so, and I asked for her number, and that's when she realized I had no idea who she was and I also was not working on the film. Security came over to escort me, but they were all laughing about the situation and let me stay. I didn't end up getting her number, but we exchanged personal emails and met up for lunch once after. Never heard from her again after the lunch, but I do have a few photos on my old PC I saved that I got with her. I work in the movie business and have met a lot of actors, actresses, Jennifer Lopez was the only one that actually made me a little starstruck. Best part is that I was checking her out while not realizing it was her until she turned around. She was like 2 feet in front of me and we just smiled at each other. She totally knew I was staring at her ass. I met Simon Pegg when I was working as a cashier at Borders, and I love to share this story because he was such a nice and funny guy. It was like a Tuesday in the afternoon and the place was empty. He came up to me with some stationery and I started ringing him up. The entire time I was thinking he looked so much like him, but I didn't think it was him since I wasn't in the UK and as far as I knew he wasn't filming a movie in Chicago, so it was a pretty quiet transaction. After it was done and I was handing him his bag with his stuff, I jokingly said, "Has anyone told you that you look like the guy from Shaun of the Dead?" He replied, "I am the guy from Shaun of the Dead." About 12 years ago I used to interview bands for the Boston Phoenix, a local newspaper that's since closed up shop. One of the bands I interviewed was the Red Romance, which was a side project of Ambulance Limited. That's not the famous person though. That night they had an opening act called Fiction Plane, who I ended up hanging out with while Red Romance was wrapping up their set. It turns out, the lead singer of Fiction Plane is the son of Sting. How did I discover this? Because Sting randomly showed up in the green room backstage while we were hanging out. He was in town that weekend to play a show at a slightly larger venue. Fenway Park. He seemed nice, and I remember he had a very calm presence about him. I guess mine would have to just be my grandpa. Not that he's a super famous celebrity or anything like that, but he was nominated for a Grammy once. He wrote a country song called The Streets of Bakersfield, which was first sung by Buck Owens then later by Dwight Yoakam. So he's not famous to you, but we're all proud of what he accomplished, and I like that even though he passed away I can still watch videos of him on YouTube. Blake Shelton even did a cover duet version on The Voice just a few months ago. It's always cool to hear the words my grandpa wrote sung. I met Brad Pitt in the mid-80s. He was a nobody and I was an extra on a movie he was also an extra on. He was talking about a movie idea he had about a Rocky-type movie about an Olympic athlete. I was like, oh yeah, nice. I still have a photo of me and my cousins and girlfriend hanging out with him in the background looking lonely. I also met Andrew McCarthy, who was the big star of the movie. I met Tom Hardy at a dog park, and since our dogs become friends, we became friends. Super cool dude. We were dog park buddies for months before he moved back to the UK. I'm not really the starstruck type, so I didn't really care, or know that much about him. But my roommate who was obsessed with him came to the dog park to meet him with me once, and Tom could not have been more accommodating. He even volunteered to do his voice message recording in the voice of Bane, and it was incredibly cool, saying he was all tied up and couldn't answer the phone. It would be very painful. Our friends would call him regularly just to hear the outgoing message. Andy Griffiths, the Assy children's book author. I think he's the most famous. I have also met Derek Landy, but while Skullduggery Pleasant is a great series, his books haven't been quite as successful, I don't think. Anyway, he didn't get a TV series based on them. Andy Griffiths was a pretty chill dude. It was at a book signing. We were only supposed to have 2 books signed because there was a huge line, but we had a book written by a different Andy Griffiths that was about learning to play the drums, and he laughed and said I didn't write it but I'll sign that one too. Literally ran into Keanu Reeves in a place up in the mountains above LA. Didn't really recognize him, just thought he was some guy I've seen there before, which actually may be true, but some other people did shortly after and totally freaked out. I was kinda embarrassed on their behalf. Guy wasn't bothering anyone, they could have just left him alone. I met Barack Obama before he was really well known. He was a state senator and was running for the Senate. I was in military uniform kind of minding my own business when he came up to me. I had no idea who he was. He shook my hand and said, "My name is Barack Obama and I'm running for the Senate and just wanted to thank you for your service." I said thank you. The strangest part now looking back on it is that after he walked away into a crowd by himself, no security or anyone else with him, and no one in the crowd looked at him any different than some random guy. A few weeks later he gave his famous speech at the 2004 Democratic Convention, and I'm sure after that his anonymity was gone. I feel bad for him that he lost that ability. Comic book legend Todd McFarlane. At my local con, the lineup for his signing was so long it ran through his booth, out the backside, down the wall, and out the celebrity section and into the artists section. It was filled to capacity 45 minutes before he was even supposed to start signing, in the single most awesome thing I have ever seen a celebrity at a con do. He didn't even bother sitting down at his table and instead walked the line. He shook everyone's hand, took every selfie asked for, and personally thanked each and every person waiting for him to sign something. Only after he walked the entire line did he go to his table and start signing memorabilia for the next 11 zillion hours. That one act is now my high water line for a celebrity at a fan convention. I managed a popular restaurant in an area where famous people would often come to in the summer, so I'll give a few answers. Robert Downey Jr. is probably the one who is most famous today. This was probably 8 years ago though. At that time someone might argue Kevin Costner maybe. The only one who really starstruck me though was Phil Jackson, as someone who grew up watching Jordan, and has been a die-hard Laker fan since late 80s/early 90s. Owen Conan O'Brien is one of my favorite people and I was lucky enough to meet him too. Most reaction received from the public was probably Barry Bonds. We had to move him to an inside table because people kept asking for autographs. Chris Brown before Rihanna incident. When he came to my town for trail spring break, his mom was there too and I introduced myself, "Lil Mama, my lip gloss is poppin'." At a mall in LA, Jeffrey from The Fresh Prince of Bel-Air swam at a pool I was working at but I didn't talk to him. This is not the most famous person I met but it's a funny story. Was heading to Pride in NYC and my friend pointed out a guy across the subway car and said he looks just like the dude from The Fault in Our Stars, Ansel Elgort. At first I was like, oh yeah, I guess lol, and we were giggling about it cause it kinda looked like he was blushing and looking over at us. The more I looked the more I was like I guess it really does look like him, but still not really convinced. I just very jokingly told my friend to check her airdrop to see if his name came up and no shit the first thing was Ansel Elgort's iPhone email, so yeah, it was him after all. He hugged my friend when we got off the train and that was the end of that. I was never into him as a fan but just thought it was a silly moment. Soulja Boy. I was shopping with my girlfriend at the time. While on a trip to Los Angeles, ran into him at the store, awkwardly stared at him a bit until I built up the courage to mention that I loved his music. He ended up being super nice and having a full-blown conversation with my girlfriend and I for about 15 minutes. I asked him what the biggest size t-shirt he's worn and my girlfriend was asking him about the time Kat Von D tattooed him. Overall super cool guy, literally didn't have to give two teenagers the time of day, but decided to. Rob Corddry was walking behind him at like 2 a.m. drunk with a group of friends in New Orleans heading back to our hotel. When we realized it was him we obnoxiously kept saying Rob. And after a few minutes he finally turned around and acknowledged yes it's me and turned back to continue on his way. As he was walking away I said you're number 2 cause you're the shit, a line from an obscure paintball movie Blackball that he was the main character in. He shot back around and goes, Blackballed? Only you and my dad have seen that movie. What are all of your names? And came back, shook all of our hands and took a picture with me. Really cool dude, and such a random run-in. Was a fun end to a great trip to New Orleans. Stephen Colbert, who is probably my #1 fave celebrity, so I was completely dumbfounded the whole time. He was at the Washington Monument doing a bit for The Late Show, and I was a Canadian tourist that happened to be there at the same time. He actually interviewed us for the bit, but as previously mentioned, I was too freaking starstruck to give any TV-worthy answers. Didn't even dawn on me until he moved on to the next folks to try to get the picture. When he initially walked up to us, he said, Is it okay if I ask you a few questions? My name is Steven. And, like, it took everything I had not to say. No shit. Man, the twinkle in his eye is there just as much as it is on TV. I was in the UK for 2 weeks in high school with Girl Scouts, and the Queen was celebrating one of her birthdays, the real one, I believe, not the one she enjoys better, and I handed her flowers during the parade. You're not supposed to talk to her, but I was dumb and wished her a wonderful birthday, and she just smiled. I've also met steam-powered Giraffe. Sure, we were at the fan photo shoot, but David was really impressed that I made the new vest with red trim, and the spines, and we chatted a bit. I got a few. Mick Jagger, bit of a sad sack really, quite shy. Rupert Murdoch, bit of cunt really, quite grumpy. Sting, actually lots of fun. To my surprise, we had an argument about the merits of some health food fad. He has a good sense of humor. Carrie Fisher, she said I'd grown, but I had no memory of having met her previously. Charming and funny, also tiny. Bono, didn't talk to him much, but seemed civil enough even though I was being a bit of a cunt myself that day. Prince Charles, allegedly I threw him out of his car when he was at a polo match. I had no idea he was there or who he was. I was just a bored and unattended 5-year-old at a polo match. I guess I should reframe it as a Republican protest. But I wasn't very political back then. Larry Fishburne and Gina Torres, both perfectly nice, but we didn't talk much. Michael Nyman, seemed nice but had a massive temper tantrum because someone else had a nicer dressing room. I was disappointed because I love his work. Trevor Horn, we had an argument about file sharing. He's a prickly fucker, but his opinions are so outlandishly out of touch that I can't help but enjoy his company. Van Morrison. Jesus, this guy is a cantankerous gobshit. I know there are lots of prickly fuckers on this list, but Van isn't even fun to be around. He's just rude for no reason. He's the one I actively dislike. Well, maybe Murdoch too, but I only had lunch with him the once, so maybe he was having a bad day that day. Shane McGowan, unintelligible, cheerful enough, I guess. But I don't find his diminished capacity quite as charming as everyone else seems to. Poor fucker isn't well. John and Brenda Romero, probably the nicest people on the list, both really intelligent and engaging folks. Utterly delightful. Gave me a real confidence boost when I was feeling down about my career. There's more, but I don't want to dox myself, and that's already plenty. I met a couple in my previous career. Danzig and Jared Leto are complete pieces of shit. Frankie Muniz is extremely affable and a great shit talker. Brian Posehn is a sweetheart and smelled nice. I had too much to drink and asked Tom DeLonge what he'd do if I tickled him, so we briefly tickled each other. Jim Adkins did not enjoy my sense of humor. Randy Johnson. This is a weird one. I've met quite a few times, starting at my aunt's wedding where he was a groomsman and we played catch with a roll. Years later I sold him a bunch of recording gear and he asked about the roll. Couldn't believe he remembered. Kurt Warner fucking balls out on bongos. I could keep going. Mitt Romney. He did a meet and greet event at my university while he was running for Utah senator. Got to meet him, take a picture with him, and listen to him talk. Even commemorated the event by producing this horrific Photoshop of said picture. He was friendly enough. It was obviously not the most personal event, but he took time to meet with each person in line. Didn't end up voting for him. Not that it mattered, he was a shoo-in to win anyway. But after also meeting Mike Lee, I can safely say Romney is the far less arrogant senator and seems to not devote every waking moment to pandering for his base.